So I had a question that was bugging me. Where did the concept of insectoids start? Now take note here. In this video, we're going to focus on the concept of an insectoid and the history of it, not just gods of bugs or bug powers, but characters and myths specifically attributed as having the body or traits of insects as well as humanoids. So let's get started with Egyptian mythos. As far back as 4000 BCE, the concept of the scarab was often attributed to the sun god Ra. However, what directly sends us to the concept of insectoids is the scarab-headed god Khepri, who's said to also be represented as the god of the rising sun, as he was depicted rolling the sun into the sky, much like a dung beetle rolling a ball on the ground is how they always represented it. Now, that's very minor because it's just a bug head per se. But it's not the only instance in Egyptian mythos. There was also the minor god Sep. Although there weren't many visuals that we could find, it said he was depicted as a centipede, and in his humanoid forms he was depicted as a mummy with feelers. He was also known as the protector from poison, stings, and bites, so very important in that time because scorpions, snakes, you don't want to die from poison. Now, as we move forward in time, we can go to Greek and Roman myth. There was a popular story of Arachne. She was a protagonist of the poem Metamorphosis, written by the Roman poet Ovid. So we're looking at Roman counterpart names as opposed to Greek counterparts. She was a talented mortal woman who challenged Athena in Greek mythos, or Minerva in Roman mythos, to a weaving contest. But after she weaved a beautiful tapestry that Minerva couldn't even discount, she was infuriated and attacked her, and out of shame, Arachne hung herself. Now that's pretty dark considering you've just been kinda shit on for doing a good job, if you will. But when she came back to life, she returned with the body of a spider. Now, this may be important with future iterations as we talk, because arachnid insectoids are not uncommon in mythos. Now, in the era of Gilgamesh, not the fake character, in Mesopotamian myth or Babylonia, there were creatures created by the primordial goddess Tiamat. They were simply known as just scorpion men and were created to wage war after the murder of her mate, Apsu, a primal being of fresh water. But after this war that was said to occur in the Enuma Elish, they seemed to become glorified doormen, and were seen standing guard outside of the gates of the sun god Shamash, oddly enough. I think we're sleeping on them, honestly. They're pretty cool. Now, it still doesn't end there, we're still going. In Mayan mythos, there may be a familiar face for some of the people out there who play the popular MOBA Smite. Amuzen-Kab was the god of bees and honey, and has been said to be depicted with bee-like wings, and oddly enough, often upside down, earning the name the descending or diving god, so very reminiscent of the way that we see bees to this date. But we're still going. Now, turning back to our spider stories, there is the creator of what was known as spider stories in African folklore. There was a being known as Anansi, and he was said to be a popular trickster god. Anansi was born as just a human, but after completing several of the sky god Nyame's trials, he actually was gifted with the body of a spider and was shown as just a spider with a human head, a spider with the upper torso of a human, and like I said, he was said to be a demigod essentially. Now, spiders still don't stop there. As we go on to the Edo period and the return of yokai, like we talked about last week, comes the story of the Joragumo. They were also known as the Entangling Bride, and another less friendly name that I'm not gonna repeat, but they were shown as arachnid woman hybrids that are capable of shapeshifting into beautiful women to lure young, handsome men home where they would slowly poison them to death. And, well, I assume you can assume the rest. Now, we're still not done with spiders, though. And the stories that were told by the Hopi Native American people, there was also an old woman spirit known as the Spider Grandmother. She was said to be descended as a minor god from the Earth Mother, who is essentially the creator in Native American myth. And she was purely known as a good spirit, said to provide advice when people needed it, and medicinal cures, very similar to a good shaman, if you will. Now, in Mythos, there are many, many other gods of bugs, gods that have stories surrounding bugs, but I couldn't really find any that were truly insectoid. But let's turn to our final story. He may be one of the most well-known insectoids, as Mythos can kind of be shied away from or left behind through history. But there was a certain incident in November 1966 by the abandoned TNT domes left behind by World War II in West Virginia. Maybe the thing that put Point Pleasant on the map. There was a humanoid moth creature seen by two couples that night, who later became a prominent local legend and was known as the Mothman. Now, stories are very vast, and so many people want to know so much about the Mothman, but he really came to notoriety when there was a bridge collapse in 1967 that they tried to blame on him. Now, so many people say that they've seen the Mothman, but I don't think that we have a clear picture. We just have the depiction of him in the town square in Point Pleasant, sadly. But I'd say if there was an insectoid, it would be him. Now, we may have strayed away from local legend and folklore, but this is where it seems that they came into the media standpoint. The first instance that I could ever find in popular media was actually a silent movie in 1902 known as A Trip to the Moon, where the creatures found on the moon were known as the Selenites and were depicted with very insect-like features. But there are still stories about it later on in 1915 with the book written by Franz Kafka known as Metamorphosis, where it depicts a traveling salesman known as Gregor Samsa who awakens transformed into an insect that was very much described reminiscent of a roach, and created a story built around isolation from the outside world, something that was called upon a lot not too long ago when we were isolated from the outside world. But the other popular appearances in American media would most definitely have to be The Fly. If you haven't heard of The Fly is two movies. The second one being loosely based around the 1958 movie that starred David Hedison. And then later on in about 1987, Jeff Goldblum, where there were stories written of eccentric scientists who wanted to try essentially transportation, different experiments surrounding transportation, if you will, and ended up with failed experiments, turning them into insect human hybrids. I think that that may be one of the best concepts of insectoids in American media. But there were some in Japan too, because I know we're all weebs here, so we might as well get to this side as well. Now, one of the first insectoid appearances I feel like we can find is a lot of the Kamen Rider characters, honestly, with its first villain, the Man Spider, in 1971, and it's continuing in constant iterations, still being created to this day, whether it be the villains or the suits that the riders wear being often influenced by grasshoppers early on. Now, one of my favorite instances personally came a lot later, around 2003, in a manga I think most of us know, called Hunter x Hunter. There was the story of the Chimera ants, who were amalgamations of every creature that their queen could get their hands on, but were primarily insectoid. Just some with penguin features or cheetah features. It was a very interesting concept that I don't think is played on enough, honestly. But there are still other mentions with One Punch Man, with Mosquito Girl, the Battle Maid Entoma, one of my personal favorites in Overlord. Of course, Rachnera, who I feel like is very heavily influenced by Arachne, and the other insectoids in Monmusu that I feel like we've all seen at least once. And then more recently, around 2021, with the evolved form of the protagonist, the nameless protagonist of So I'm a Spider, So What, or the Japanese name, if you will. But this question, unfortunately, I think will continue to plague me, as I felt like I couldn't really find the source. But I can't really complain because it's dove into the VTubing world, which is super cool. We have so many cool insectoid VTubers that have been around for so long now, and they're only getting cooler thanks to the debut of a certain cockroach. But let's not forget about those creators who have been there for years. And behind me, I'll have some sleeper picks, if you will, that I think you should really check out. And then lastly, of course, my wonderful guests that you'll see on Hungry for Knowledge Monster Month Insectoid Edition on Saturday, October 21st at 8 p.m. EST. So make sure to take a peek at that and tell me what other insectoid creatures that you enjoy, and maybe even some insectoid VTubers that you'd like to see on my talk show, because they're pretty cool, I have to admit. But I'll see you next time.